I thought my wife was secretly preparing to leave me, so I quietly protected everything I had. I never expected what happened next. Hello everyone, welcome to Reddit Reads. Before we start today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thank you very much. Now, let's begin the video. I never thought I would be the one sharing a story like this. For years, I watched people post unbelievable experiences online and always assumed they had to be exaggerated. My life felt ordinary. I had a stable job, a comfortable home, and a wife I believed loved me as much as I loved her. If someone had told me 6 months ago that everything I knew was about to fall apart, I would have laughed. My wife, who I'll call Olivia for privacy, and I had been together for nearly 7 years. We had been married for almost 5. Like every couple, we had disagreements, but nothing serious enough to make me question our relationship. We made plans together, celebrated birthdays, visited family on weekends, and talked about buying a larger house within the next few years. From the outside, we looked like the kind of couple people expected to stay together forever. That's why the changes were so difficult to notice at first. They didn't happen all at once. They arrived little by little. The first thing I noticed was her phone. It suddenly became attached to her hand. She used to leave it on the kitchen counter while cooking, or on the coffee table while we watched TV. Now she carried it everywhere. Even if she walked into another room for 30 seconds, the phone went with her. One evening I laughed and asked, "What happened? Did your phone become more valuable than our house?" She smiled without looking up. "Work has been crazy. I'm waiting for an important email." That answer sounded reasonable, so I didn't think much about it. A few days later, she added a passcode to her phone. Then she turned off message previews. Soon after that, she started placing it face down whenever we sat together. Again, none of those things proved anything. Everyone deserves privacy. I kept reminding myself that I was probably overthinking everything. But then her behavior started changing too. Our conversations became shorter. Whenever I talked about future plans, she seemed distracted. If I asked where she wanted to go on vacation, she'd simply reply, "We'll figure it out later." If I mentioned renovating the guest room, she'd shrug and change the subject. It felt as if she had stopped looking forward to a future with me. I blamed stress. Her company had recently gone through major changes, and everyone there seemed overwhelmed. I convinced myself that was the reason. I wanted to believe that explanation, because the alternative was something I wasn't ready to face. Then something happened that I still think about to this day. One Friday afternoon, she texted me saying she was meeting a coworker for coffee after work. I happened to be nearby picking up a birthday gift for my younger brother. I thought it might be fun to surprise her. When I arrived, I didn't walk into the cafe. Instead, I saw her standing outside alone, talking on the phone. She looked nervous. She kept looking around while pacing back and forth. I couldn't hear the entire conversation, but I caught a few sentences. "It's almost ready. I just need a little more time. Everything will be different soon." Those words stayed with me. When she finally walked inside the cafe, I decided not to interrupt. That evening, I casually asked how coffee had gone. Without hesitation, she smiled and said, "Jessica spent the whole time complaining about her boyfriend." The story sounded perfect, almost too perfect. Every detail came out so smoothly that it felt rehearsed. For the first time since we had met, I felt like my wife had just lied directly to my face. I didn't confront her. I simply nodded and changed the subject. Over the next week, I started paying closer attention, not because I wanted to spy on her, because I desperately wanted to prove myself wrong. Unfortunately, every day gave me another reason to worry. One night during dinner, she suddenly asked, "Do you know where all our financial documents are?" I looked at her, slightly confused. "Why?" I was just thinking. If something ever happened to one of us, the other should know where everything is. It sounded responsible. I agreed with her. But something about the timing felt strange. We had never talked about organizing our finances before. Now she brought it up twice within a single week. A few days later, she asked another question. "Do you know all the passwords for our accounts?" I smiled. "Since when are you so interested in our finances?" She laughed softly. "I'm just trying to be prepared." Again, a perfectly reasonable answer, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. That night, I barely slept. Every strange moment replayed inside my head. The hidden phone, the mysterious phone calls, the distance between us, the questions about money. The conversation outside the cafe. Individually, none of them meant anything. Together, they painted a picture I didn't want to believe. The following morning, after she left for work, I sat down in front of my computer. I wasn't looking for evidence. I was looking for peace of mind. Instead, I found something that changed everything. The moment I logged into our joint account, I expected to find nothing unusual. Maybe a grocery payment I had forgotten about, or a utility bill that had been processed early. Instead, I noticed several small transfers spread over the previous 6 weeks. None of them were large enough to stand out on their own, but together, they added up to several $1,000s. What bothered me wasn't the amount. It was the pattern. Every transfer happened late at night, and each description was so generic that it revealed almost nothing. I stared at the screen for several minutes, hoping there was an explanation I simply hadn't thought of yet. Maybe she had been planning a surprise. Maybe she was helping someone in her family. Maybe I was letting my imagination run wild. I closed the laptop and walked away, telling myself not to make any decisions while emotions were high. That promise lasted less than an hour. I called my oldest friend, Daniel. We had known each other since college, and unlike most people, he never rushed to conclusions. After listening quietly, he asked only one question. Have you actually talked to her about any of this? Not really. Then don't accuse her of anything yet, but if something feels wrong, quietly make sure you understand your finances. Information isn't betrayal. His advice stayed with me. Information isn't betrayal. Over the next few days, I didn't search through her phone or follow her around town. Instead, I focused on facts I could legally access. I reviewed our shared accounts, updated copies of important financial documents, and made sure every investment statement was organized. If nothing was wrong, no harm had been done. If something was wrong, I didn't want to be completely unprepared. Meanwhile, Olivia's behavior became even harder to ignore. She started smiling at her phone more often than she smiled at me. Some nights, she stayed awake long after I had gone to bed, claiming she was answering work emails. Other nights, she volunteered to run errands that somehow took twice as long as they should have. One Saturday morning, she announced she was meeting another coworker for brunch. Anyone I know? I asked. No, she replied almost instantly, just someone from the office. She grabbed her purse, checked her phone twice before leaving, and kissed me on the cheek. It felt automatic, almost like checking another item off a list. After the front door closed, I stood alone in the kitchen, wondering when our marriage had started feeling like two roommates sharing the same house. That afternoon, she came home unusually cheerful. She talked about restaurants she wanted to try, movies we should watch, and even suggested planning a weekend getaway. A month earlier, that version of her would have made me happy. Now, it confused me. The sudden warmth felt disconnected from everything else that had happened. It was as if someone had flipped a switch. Late that evening, while we were watching television, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. For the first time in weeks, she had accidentally left it out of reach. She rushed to grab it before I even looked in its direction. Our eyes met for only a second. She forced a smile. Just work. I nodded. Neither of us believed that answer anymore. For the first time since we got married, silence had become louder than our conversations. And deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was coming, I was much bigger than either of us was prepared for. Monday morning felt strangely normal. Olivia kissed me goodbye before leaving for work, smiled, and reminded me not to forget dinner with my parents that weekend. If someone had watched us for those 30 seconds, they would have seen a perfectly happy couple. The moment the front door closed, the silence returned. I couldn't explain it, but my instincts refused to let the situation go. Every logical explanation I had come up with over the past few weeks had slowly fallen apart. I wasn't looking for proof that my marriage was ending anymore. I was looking for the truth. That afternoon, while organizing some paperwork in my home office, I noticed a folder containing copies of our insurance policies and investment records. Olivia had always insisted we keep everything organized, so seeing the folder wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that several recent documents were missing. I searched every drawer. Nothing. At first I assumed she had moved them somewhere else, but when I checked our filing cabinet upstairs, those documents weren't there either. I sent her a simple text. Hey, do you know where the updated investment papers are? She replied almost instantly. I think they're still in the blue folder. They weren't. I didn't answer. Either she genuinely believed they were there, or she hadn't expected me to check. That evening she came home carrying takeout from my favorite restaurant. I figured neither of us would feel like cooking tonight, she said with a warm smile. For a moment I almost forgot everything. We laughed over dinner. We talked about work. We even watched 2 episodes of a show we'd been following together. Everything felt normal. Almost. Too normal. Around 10 that night, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. "I'll be right back." She stepped onto the back patio and quietly closed the sliding door behind her. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I noticed something else. She was smiling. Not the polite smile she'd been giving me lately. This one looked genuine. When she returned a few minutes later, she acted as though nothing had happened. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just someone from work asking about tomorrow." She answered so quickly it sounded practiced. I simply nodded. The next day, I made a decision. Not because I wanted to spy on my wife, because uncertainty had become unbearable. During my lunch break, I met Daniel for coffee. After listening carefully, he leaned back in his chair. "You're trying to solve this with assumptions," he said. "What do you mean?" "You have questions, but no answers. Stop guessing. Protect yourself without accusing anyone." "What would you do?" "I'd make copies of every important document, review every shared account, and talk to a lawyer about what your rights are. Not because you're planning for divorce, because responsible people prepare for possibilities." His advice wasn't dramatic. It was practical. And that made it impossible to ignore. Over the next several days, I quietly organized everything. Mortgage documents, bank statements, investment summaries, insurance records, tax returns. For the first time in years, I knew exactly where every dollar we owned was located. Oddly enough, doing that brought me peace. Until Friday afternoon. I was reviewing our joint credit card statement when one charge caught my attention. A consultation fee. It wasn't expensive, just a few $100s. The merchant name meant nothing to me. Curious, I searched for it online. My heartbeat slowed as the page loaded. The business wasn't a restaurant. It wasn't a hotel. It wasn't connected to her job. It belonged to a family law office. I read the name 3 times, convinced I had made a mistake. Maybe they handled other legal services too. Maybe there was another explanation. I clicked on their website. Divorce, asset division, spousal support, marital settlements. Those words filled my screen. I sat frozen. For nearly 5 minutes, I couldn't move. I still didn't know why she had contacted them. Maybe she only wanted information. Maybe someone from work had asked for a recommendation. Maybe. But the excuses that had comforted me for weeks suddenly felt much weaker. When Olivia came home that evening, she smiled exactly as she always did. "How was your day?" I looked into her eyes and smiled back. It was interesting. For the first time in our marriage, I wasn't sure whether either of us was telling the truth anymore. The next morning, I woke up before Olivia for the first time in months. I couldn't stop thinking about the law firm's website. Maybe there was still an innocent explanation, but deep down, I knew I couldn't keep relying on hope alone. Hope wasn't a plan. I made breakfast as usual, and when she came downstairs, she acted like nothing had changed. "Morning," she said with a smile. "Morning." We ate in silence for a few minutes before she mentioned that she'd be working late again. "Big project?" I asked. She nodded without looking up from her coffee. "Yeah, the deadline got moved up." I wished I believed her. As soon as she left the house, I called Daniel. "I think things are getting worse," I admitted. "What happened?" I told him about the family law office. There was a long pause. Finally, he said, "Don't panic. Facts first, emotions second." That sentence stayed with me for the rest of the day. Instead of making accusations, I focused on protecting myself. I downloaded copies of every financial statement I legally had access to, reviewed our insurance policies, and created a secure folder containing every important document. If nothing happened, no harm was done. If something did happen, I wouldn't be caught unprepared. A few days later, Olivia surprised me. She suggested we go out for dinner. It had been months since she'd planned anything for us. Throughout the evening, she laughed at my jokes, held my hand across the table, and even talked about places she'd like to visit next summer. For a moment, I questioned everything. Maybe I had been wrong. Maybe stress had been affecting both of us. On the drive home, she suddenly asked, "Do you ever think about selling the house?" The question caught me off guard. "Not really. Why?" "I don't know, just wondering." She quickly changed the subject. But I noticed something. She wasn't asking because she wanted to move. She was asking because she wanted to know how I felt about our biggest asset. That single question erased every bit of reassurance I had felt during dinner. 2 nights later, I woke up around 2 in the morning. Olivia wasn't in bed. I walked downstairs and saw the light coming from the home office. Before I reached the door, I heard the soft click of a keyboard. The moment she noticed my footsteps, the screen went dark. "Oh, you scared me," she said with a nervous laugh. "What are you doing?" I couldn't sleep. I was just answering a few work emails. At 2 o'clock in the morning, from our home office. On the same computer where we kept copies of our financial records. I didn't argue. I simply wished her good night and walked back upstairs. For the first time since this all began, I wasn't wondering whether something was wrong. I was wondering how much I still didn't know. The following afternoon, while organizing paperwork in the garage, I noticed one of our document boxes had been moved. Inside, nothing appeared missing. But the folders weren't in the order I had left them. Someone had searched through them. Someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. Standing there alone, I realized something that sent a chill down my spine. Whatever Olivia was planning, she wasn't just thinking about leaving. She was preparing for what came after. The next morning, I made one final decision. I wasn't going to accuse Olivia. I wasn't going to argue. And I definitely wasn't going to ignore everything that had happened over the past 2 months. Instead, I focused on protecting myself. Over the following week, I met with my financial advisor and my attorney one last time. Together, we reviewed every account, every investment, and every legal document connected to my personal finances. I wasn't trying to hide anything or punish anyone. I simply wanted to make sure that if my marriage truly was coming to an end, I would face it with clear records and a calm mind. On my advisor's suggestion, I also placed a freeze on our joint credit and set up alerts on every account we shared. It felt excessive at the time. I told myself it was just one more box to check off a list. Then, exactly 9 days later, everything changed. My attorney called with a strange tone in his voice. Someone had tried to open a new line of credit against our house. The application had come from our joint information, submitted quietly, online, late at night. It had been denied automatically, only because of the freeze I had placed the week before. I sat there staring at the notification for a long time. Every small question Olivia had asked over the past 2 months, about the house, about our passwords, about where our documents were kept, hadn't been about preparing to leave. It had been about preparing to take. That same evening, Olivia came home unusually early. She walked into the living room, sat across from me, and took a deep breath. "We need to talk." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. I had been expecting them for weeks, though not for the reason I once thought. She looked down at her hands before finally speaking. "I don't think this marriage is working anymore." For several seconds, neither of us said anything. I wasn't shocked. The sadness had arrived long before that conversation. "What do you want?" I finally asked. I want a divorce." Hearing the words still hurt. No amount of preparation could change that. But this time, something else surfaced first. "Did you try to open a line of credit against our house?" I asked quietly. Her face changed in a way I had never seen before. For the first time since this all began, she wasn't performing calm. "You froze the accounts," she said, her voice sharp. "You had no right to do that without telling me." "They're my accounts too," I said. "I have every right." She didn't argue further. She looked away. And for the first time, I saw something closer to fear than sadness in her expression. Over the next few weeks, our attorneys handled nearly every conversation. The process wasn't easy, but because I had already organized every financial record, frozen every account, and kept proof of every unusual transfer, there was very little she could dispute. The paperwork spoke for itself. Eventually, something unexpected came out. During one of our final meetings, Olivia quietly admitted the truth. A man from her company's finance department, the same coworker she had claimed to meet for coffee, had convinced her that if she moved quickly enough, she could restructure our joint assets before I noticed anything was wrong. He had guided someone else through the same plan once before. It hadn't ended well for that family either. The moment his plan failed, he stopped answering her calls entirely. "I should have talked to you sooner," she said. I didn't argue with her. Maybe she was right. Maybe we had both stopped communicating long before either of us realized it. And maybe that silence was exactly what he had been counting on. A few months after the divorce was finalized, I drove past the cafe where I had first seen her pacing outside with her phone. I parked for a moment and simply looked at the building. It no longer filled me with anger, only perspective. That place had marked the beginning of the hardest chapter of my life, but because I had been careful instead of careless, it hadn't marked the end of my future. I kept my home. I kept my savings. I kept everything I had spent years building, fully intact. Over the following year, I focused on rebuilding. I spent more time with my family. I reconnected with old friends. I traveled to places I had always postponed visiting. Most importantly, I learned something I wish I had understood much earlier. Trust is essential in every relationship, but trust should never replace honest communication, and it should never mean staying blind to your own life. Ignoring problems doesn't make them disappear. Talking about them does. And sometimes, protecting yourself quietly is what allows the truth to surface on its own. Looking back now, I don't see those months as a failure. I see them as a lesson that changed the way I value honesty, preparation, and peace of mind. Life moved forward. So did I. Thank you for listening to my story. And if there's one thing I hope you take away from it, it's this. Never let fear make your decisions. But never ignore your instincts either. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do isn't to fight for a relationship at any cost. Sometimes, it's having the courage to face the truth with dignity. Protect what's yours without a single loud word, and begin writing a better chapter of your own life. Thank you. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so, and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.